Hello, and welcome to Confessions of a Successful Leader, hosted by me, Andrew Tallents, the self-coaching expert. In each episode of the show, we hear the insightful confessions of a successful leader who wants to inspire others to live their professional and personal dreams. I am always keen to hear your feedback, particularly in relation to the kinds of leaders you would like me to invite onto the show in future. But for now, sit back, relax, and enjoy the rich insights from our special guest. Hello and welcome to another episode of Confessions of a Successful Leader, hosted by me, Andrew Tallents, the self-coaching expert. I'm delighted that Yohann Abittan has joined me in the studio today. Welcome, Yohann.
Thank you very much, Andrew. It's a pleasure and an honor to join you and talk about deep, vulnerable topics that get to the heart of what leadership is and what makes us better leaders.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad you've come with that mindset. Thank you. Our audience is in anticipation. And from those that have watched the show, listened to the show before, we always start by asking our guest just to tell us a little bit about themselves in their own words. So, Yohann, tell us your story.
Yeah. To start at the beginning, I'm Swiss French. I'm an entrepreneur. I come from a family of entrepreneurs. I have 3 older brothers who are all entrepreneurs. My father is a serial entrepreneur, so there's a pattern there for sure. Personally, I'm now in the second year of my first true entrepreneurship journey, where I'm the founder of a company called NewMail AI. We build agents that are executive assistants, that are sales assistants that you can connect to your inbox and benefit from almost instantly. They learn who you are, what you do, what your company does, your products and services. And straight away, they start creating value for you by organizing, prioritizing, tracking your tasks, drafting replies in your style, and helping you get more done. So that's a little bit about my background, myself, my current company, and I'm happy to dig into any of that.
Sure, thank you. So I know being an entrepreneur is a thankless task. It's never done in terms of the task that we're trying to do. But when you do switch off and get away from work, we all have to, refresh and re-energize in that sense. What is it that you do outside of work?
I think it's important to have a practice of different things that we rely on that are outside of work. As you say, I would say I'm a family man. I don't have my own children yet, but I spend a lot of time with my family. We're very close. I like to be outdoors in nature frequently. I'm a big avid fan of skiing. I like to move and to do yoga and sports to kind of get that restless energy out and get some new fresh energy in. And lately I'm trying to get back into, it's probably my 13th year of playing guitar. I would say I'm probably finally getting to intermediate plus, and that's a lovely challenge where you can see on a different kind of time scale, perhaps the result of your effort, and it's also a creative endeavor that's rewarding.
Do you see yourself as a acoustic or lead guitar in a band or a bass guitar? What's the dream around that?
So I actually always started, I was inspired by the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and I started with electric guitar, and their solos are just music to my ears, literally. So that's the kind of the riffs and the melody, that's more where my passion lies. I have played acoustic, I've played all kinds over the years, but rather than being in a campfire, I prefer to imagine myself as a rock star.
I love that. Well, my 16-year-old daughter came to me the other day and she's into the Red Hot Chili Peppers. I actually saw them in the UK a few years ago, and she describes them to me as you need to get into funk. So I'm sure everyone out there will know what that kind of guitar sounds like. So that's really interesting. And also today, this has been recorded and will come out at a later date, but I think it's World Happiness Day today, or the Index Day has come out today, and Scandinavian countries have done very well in this, and the UK is actually moving down. So it did talk about this importance of family in terms of connections. I heard what you said earlier. What is it about your family moments that you spend together that actually gives you that kind of sense of, just well-being? What is it that you gain from being with family?
I think I have this built-in unfair advantage that, yes, being an entrepreneur is thankless, but when you find your tribe of entrepreneurs who are equally passionate, dedicated to building something greater than themselves, which is what I think entrepreneurship is at the end of the day, is wanting to make something that multiple people want to dedicate themselves to. Maybe I should precise that while we are four brothers who are all entrepreneurs, none of us are working directly in the same activities. So we're all entrepreneurs independently. And so coming together, the fact that we're, different industries, same family, the level of trust is super high, and the recognition of each other's work and toil, and it's just, it's brilliant. I think also there's an aspect of intergenerational um, connection, which is my brothers, we range across 17 years. And so I'm closer in age to some of their children, and just being able to spend time with people that you love and trust at different stages of life reminds you that you might be, in French, we have an expression, which is to have your nose in your bike handles, meaning like you're so close to what you're doing that you can't even see the forest for the trees. And so being able to, get a breath of fresh air and see different people with completely different interests and cares is a wonderful way, I think, to help disconnect and reconnect with deeper, more beautiful things of life than just like your KPIs of the week that you're trying to hit.
Yeah, I love that. And this might link in later, and I'd appreciate your view later on in the podcast around this. The knowledge we have now, the 5 generations are in businesses, and how particularly the older generation and my generation in business are really struggling with the younger generations we can learn from, because they're doing things differently, right? And we do things differently. So we'll come to that later on, because I'm sure you've got experience of that as well. But let's take you back to this family and childhood. And this is where our story always starts for our guests. Talk to us a little bit about what that environment was like in growing up, some of the positives, some of the negatives, being such a large family and seeing this entrepreneurial spirit around you all the time. Let's take us back.
Yeah, so I grew up in Switzerland, and I think in some ways incredibly lucky, incredibly blessed in terms of, not needing for anything economically. I think we all face our own challenges, and we all live the different stages of adolescence where you need to rebel and find the boundaries and better situate yourself as an individual. I think everybody goes through those phases. I think I was relatively um, calm and um, easy child because my parents were experimented. They had 3 children before me. So by the time I got there, it wasn't, you need to be back at midnight. I had 3 to 5 business days that I could negotiate around. They always had a really strong foundation, I would say, of unconditional love. So that made everything else kind of easier to process, given that I would have this support than the intricacies of life. I think there's probably my parents felt this challenge that when basically the generation before me, my father is self-made. He came from Morocco, was an immigrant to France, and he had to find his way from nothing and very little connections, resources at all. And I have grown up in a completely different environment where I had resources, connections, etc. And I ended up, so I think from his perspective, probably he was wanting for me to have challenges like he did to give you that crucible moment to see what you're made of, and make sure that I too would have the challenges needed to keep me driven. And I think we talked a little bit about imposter syndrome. I think that's something that's come in multiple times throughout my career, because I had this carved path in front of me of my 3 brothers and my father all being entrepreneurs. I felt I had an unfair advantage of much more knowledge of what it takes to build a business, but really experience is a toothbrush, very useful, but only to yourself. So until I really got the opportunity to do it myself, and I felt that I purposefully delayed it, as you said, because of imposter syndrome. I didn't feel worthy of, because I saw the magnitude of the challenge that it presented. I didn't want to rush into it. I didn't want to be too ignorant. And yet, at the end of the day, what you find out is you are ignorant about entrepreneurship until you are actually doing it yourself. I felt in my last experience that because I was touching all the aspects of the business as head of product, that I was getting an experience that was very similar to entrepreneurship, but it's fundamentally still different. You have to be, I think, as an entrepreneur, that jet stream of motivation, that vision that drives people, that gets people to want to come together and align and build something new, because building something new, I would say, is just magnitudes harder than doing something that's already been explored. So yeah, I've had this imposter syndrome of not starting too young. And then I had this turning point where my three brothers went to business school. And when I was 17 and a half, we had a conversation and they said, you really shouldn't go to business school. You should do something different. You have a technical mind. You like the sciences. Maybe you should what would you like to do? And I thought that was interesting. They said, go learn something real because the business side of things doesn't get learned in a classroom. And so I pivoted at that time. I said, okay, great. I'm going to do engineering. And I ended up in this engineering faculty, learning cybersecurity and software and having once again this huge imposter syndrome. I think that I probably was one of the people who graduated from my university who probably had the lower math grades that were possible to attain and still successfully complete that experience. And so at times I felt like I had a foot in both worlds of being an imposter, of being a coder, being an imposter, of being a business sales and marketing person. And I used to tell this as a joke that the engineers, I could convince them all that I was really good at the business side, even though I wasn't such a great engineer. And then conversely to the business people, they saw I knew some business, but they really thought I had these big technical chops. It goes back to this imposter syndrome. And that's actually what drove me into product. Product is kind of this intersection that meshes between engineering and business. That's when I started to take a little bit more confidence and realize that actually having a foot in both worlds is rather unique. It's a relatively rare profile. And so being able to do both, even if it's not an expert in either, that was valuable. So I started working in startups, being the bridge between the technical teams and the sales and marketing and the customers and bridging that gap. And that led me to my successful leadership experience, I would say, of joining Lodestar, which was a company created by some NVIDIA executives that had spun off to build a company to do visual inspections of products on assembly lines. I'm not going to get too deep in the details for very big companies, Fortune 50 companies. And I started there as a business intern, general purpose business intern, and I wasn't even paid. And they found my profile interesting because they came to present at where I did my master's in AI products. And they told us about their startup. And when they were done, all these hands went up and people asked them questions about details of machine learning frameworks. And I asked them, what's the vision? What's the mission? What's the competitive advantage? Where's this going? And I was the only one that had this kind of question. So they asked me to stay at the end and we developed a relationship and I started working for them. And then over time, I became their product manager. And then finally, I would say head of product or principal product manager. And I was running a small team and coordinating 10 senior engineers. And I was by far the youngest person on that team. So I think that was a good validation that the skills that I'd been building really have a place and a value. And it was a great experience. But then again, that imposter syndrome comes in when we ended up building exactly what we set out to build. And the market had actually moved and we'd been building a little bit too much in isolation. So when we actually brought it to market 2.5 years later, we were able to get a few deals with big companies, but we realized that we were looking for a unicorn of a company that would have people that were experts in the subject matter, but also even knowledge that they could drive AI projects to automate things in their companies. So fundamentally, we were a bit early on the execution of AI projects, even at these big companies. We're working with directors of machine vision, but there were very few companies at the time who really understood and had deployed those kind of champions of these technologies. And we kind of underestimated the difficulty in scaling up our identification of these champions. And so we ended up, unfortunately, not growing at a rate that matched our ambitions and the money that we raised. And so we ended up, that company ended up shutting down. And as a leader of the product, I identified my whole identity was built around this platform that I was encouraging 10 people to build on a daily basis, and then fighting as much as I could to sell it to companies. And seeing that not come to fruition was another moment of realizing maybe identifying fully with the work is not the healthiest pattern. Failure is kind of built into this entrepreneurship experience. And in some parts of the world, I think Silicon Valley is very good at understanding that it's a natural, very useful part of the entrepreneurship experience. Other places, maybe a bit less so. Yeah, that's a quick recap
Oh, that's great.
of the journey.
Yeah, because it leads me into, I guess, a deeper question, particularly this element of once you've got the team of 10, you'd obviously got very skilled and known for bridging that gap between obviously the technical engineering side and the business side and acting as that bridge. But then when you get to lead, 10 engineers eventually, just and particularly as you're then attached, if you like, to the outcome so much, just talked about some of the challenges you were facing there from a leadership perspective of these people you were responsible for, and yet recognizing it was difficult and challenging and what that meant for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So as a product manager, it was interesting. And then when I became head of product or head of special projects, I ended up having a team that were more like direct reports, but still I wasn't negotiating their compensation. That was my CEO. But really, I was coordinating 10 engineers who were not my direct reports. And then I had a team of 2 support people that I eventually trained to help me qualify leads and try to do some sales. And I also had a designer and some contract developers and also some data labelers that were all part of the projects that I was running as the manager. So throughout that phase, it was interesting to evolve from purely soft power of just influencing and identifying how to align people and communication channels between them to make them work together, understanding how people wanted to communicate, and then explaining that to other people who were not effectively communicating with them. That soft power is something I got quite good at. And I feel like probably if you look at my life, I come from a family where there are a lot of strong personalities. My dad can be a bulldozer at times. And it was very interesting growing up to be able to navigate these huge personalities without being crushed. Not that they would want to do that, but that's the reality of what it's like when you're youngest by 17 years and sitting at the same table and trying to get a word in edgewise with infinitely less experience. So it was a lot of soft power. And then as I kind of grew into my own as a leader and had direct reports, I felt the imposter syndrome that, I'm still leaning into this younger brother soft power and I'm not laying down the law as a real leader would. And then over time, I realized that actually that's just part of who I am as a leader. I'm an empathetic leader. And for me, it's much more about making people feel seen, understood, and appreciated. And to also see their challenges and their difficulties and to not sugarcoat them and handle them as such, but to just always be on their side. That's how I want to lead. That's how I want to build teams and organizations. So I've outgrown this imposter syndrome of this soft power being a weak kind of leadership to actually just it being how I am as a leader, which is not defined by who my idols and formative figures are. It's just who I am. But it took a while to kind of understand that I don't have to be exactly the leader that I think my brothers or father are. And so once again, it's been useful to have 3 brothers with whom, we have some redundancy. So we can see different ways to live and build that are equally valid and beautiful, even if they're.
I love that because what you're saying there, and this comes up a lot with my clients, CEOs and founders, is that if we can shift the language from I should to I am, it's really doing what you're talking about, because the should has got this judgment angle about what the people think I should be, whereas I am is acceptance in that sense and living with that and being with it and putting people around us. So I love that. So talk to us a little bit then about this, what happens next in the sense of failure happens to all of us at certain points in our lives. And there are some people that are very good at seeing the gift in that failure, because there's a gift in every failure. Not everyone sees it. So for you, what was the gift at the time looking back on that?
It was a huge gift to be put in that place where I was given a lot of responsibility and I was challenged to grow with a project in ways that were not easy. There was also the context that it was COVID at the time, and we were growing from a team of initially 3 people to, by the end, including contractors and part-time people, around probably 25. So actually being the coordinator, soft power, culture person, I think I played a critical role in making that chemistry, that gel happen. I also got to see and experience, understand what it's like to go from a blank slate and build something new, and the pitfalls of what does it mean to not be close enough to your market? How far can you go down the road building something amazing before realizing that, well, actually the demands of the people, and that's the most important thing, they flow and they change over time. And you can't just take one reading and think, okay, I've figured it out, that's what I'm going to do. And learning to have that flexible approach. And fundamentally, I feel like entrepreneurship more and more every day, it's a lesson of humility, that the more ego you have baked into this, the least successful you're going to be. I'm sure there are stories where people are successful and then they get ego, but definitely I think it's the biggest hindrance is having your ego baked into a project. It's not because the project is going well or not well that you should feel well or unwell. I had the chance to do Vipassana, which is a 10-day long silent meditation retreat. And they teach you a few things there, a few key lessons of philosophy. And one of them they call equanimity. And there's this idea that we all have desires and fears, and running away from fears towards desires is a source of tension that drags us down, tires us out, and just gnaws at us. Whereas if we can maintain a more equal disposition and try to live life without feeling so affected by every external stimulus, that we can travel much further and have much more meaningful experiences rather than being too reactive based on ego. And acting in the world requires that kind of distance from your emotions to truly be an independent creator and not just a victim of circumstances.
I love that. And linking to that for the audience, the book I'm reading at the moment, which discusses this in great detail, is The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, which again is talking exactly to what you're talking about, that we only have now. We have this moment, and therefore we have to be impactful in this moment. So thank you for sharing that. I'm really fascinated by that meditation course. Let's then talk about what happened next. So we've learned what the gift was. You'd been through this experience. You were still young. You'd started to lead a team in that sense. Just talk about what happened after that.
So just to clarify, you're talking about I was given the chance to
Yes.
grow with the project, with the team, and then
Yes.
what ended
And then
up
it
happening
closed.
in
Yeah.
terms
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. So what happened next?
I had this innate idea, which I'm pretty proud of, which was to give myself a chance to rediscover my passion. I felt so burnt out at the end of this experience. We had, some acquisition talks at the end of this experience to try and kind of salvage what we created. And everybody was on their last licks, and you we couldn't do it. And I think it speaks to a lot of the dysfunction of that organization, how we felt by the time that we had to actually talk to other companies to maybe sell ourselves. And so I decided at that time that I would take 6 months. And for those 6 months, I would not even consider joining another project, because I was so just out of juice, and I'd given all my enthusiasm and I no longer had any. And I didn't want to rebound into another project based on an ego created feeling that to feel like I'm enough, I need to be doing something. And I felt that I was vulnerable at that moment. And so I told myself, I need to take a break and then and not think about work at all. And after those 6 months, I started itching about wanting to do something else. And I found that exploring myself, my passions, who I am, and reconnecting with myself, I understood that my passion was still the same, but giving myself the opportunity to choose something else helped me rediscover my passion in a way that I had got back to that fuel of passion to create something again and create something new with what I'd learned that matches.
No, absolutely. But once you then decided that, that's really good to hear that, understand. Just then talk us through. So what is it then you did? So in terms of having that connection, it's really important to reconnect. Just talk to the audience about then what you then did after that.
Yeah. So after that, I started to look for opportunities that matched some of my life decisions and some of my industry kind of passions. And so I started talking to different cloud AI companies and seeing what kind of role I could have for them, leading teams, building AI teams for kind of dynamic, high growth organizations. And around that time, I actually had a friend that resurfaced from my past and said, "Hey, I'm working on this new project and I'd love to have your input on this." And I had some availability. And so I thought it was a cool project and a great person. And so I joined them and we started working. Well, I started helping him out, giving him some inputs. And then I realized actually I would be interested in building something. And now that I realized I've been 7 years on a visa in the United States. And I realized that visa was coming to an end. And one way it was a failure. And in another way, I realized if I'm no longer bound to an employer, I can finally become an entrepreneur. And it was that alignment where you look back and connect all the dots and realize this is what I've got to do. And so I started working with him. And after a while, I told him, listen, what you're working on, it was a good start, but we've got to pivot and we've got to change things. This by itself, I believe we validated, is not the direction that the company should be going. And I'd like you to give me the trust and I want to lead this venture with you. He was a very, very technical profile. And I told him, you clearly want to build. That's what you're passionate about. That's what you've always done. Let me be your co-founder. Let me handle the rest and you can build. I think there was a little bit of ego into this idea of giving up something, which I think to anybody who's building a company, the role of CEO is not a fun role. If you're going to start at zero, it's not like you're CEO of a public company and you've got a private jet you can use. You have to build everything from the ground up. You're calling everybody in your Rolodex. And so it's not all fun and games. But we ended up having this human realization that the project I was interested in building, that he'd reawakened that possibility to me, was not the one he wanted to build. And so we amicably decided that, it just makes more sense to do our own projects. And I started it again, now fully 100% owner of my idea, my project. I built in 2 weeks, a little prototype that I started giving out to people and started getting a lot of demand for, AI that can help structure this unending suffering that is an email inbox. And we found that it was funny. One of my early co-founders' criticisms was that the problem was too small. And it turns out that it's a vast, vast problem. Yeah. And 2 years later, we're still at the tip of the iceberg. There's so much to do. But it's been a very interesting journey to start with a problem, bring it to people, have low ego about it, and then see like the engagement. And one thing that hit me in terms of how different it was from the last company I worked at was how quickly and easily people were willing to give us data and teach us about their problems so that we could solve it for them. And that felt wildly different than in my last venture, where we started with the technology we knew would be fantastic. The problem that we chose as a sample problem was based on an experience that was already a few years old and just didn't translate into the world of 5 years later. We started with the problem of identifying disease in corn and counting tomatoes in the video. Those were relevant in some world, but by the time that we were truly able to deliver that solution, the world had changed and those problems were no longer the most pressing important things. And probably, I think when you choose a problem like this, you have to specialize and you can't just say, we're going to do this type of problem and it's going to be like many others. I think it's much more important to start with something very narrow, yet amazing at it, and learn who the people are in the field, what their behaviors are, get to know them very deeply. So you can say, well, it's actually beetroot in this region of the world at this time of year that has this specific problem, and this is the KPI it affects. And so we save the beetroot for these people, and here's where they meet because they all go sell their beets at the market. And I think that's a more reasonable approach. And I'm still learning and still making the same mistakes, and always trying to narrow down, then build value, refocus, simplify. And it's this never ending cycle. But if you can love it and enjoy it every day, then there's nothing more beautiful.
Thank you. And I just wanted to ask you, it's really interesting. You had this catalyst through the old friend who approached you, looked at potentially being a co-founder, but then that didn't work out. But that was the way into you deciding you were going to set up on your own. What was the decision that you made and what was behind it about why you decided to search for a co-founder? Because you could have done this thing on your own, in terms of just founding yourself and developing yourself. What was important to you about a co-founder?
Actually, I wasn't looking at the time. It wasn't even on my horizon that I should be building a company. I was thinking I want to stay in New York, and to stay in New York, I need somebody to sponsor my visa. And that's the mindset I'd been in for 7 years. And it was not until I was spending time with my friend, building and coding and having fun, and realizing, hey, if I give up on this idea that I need to be in New York more than 3 months a year, which already felt like a lot, that I could actually build a company. And then, so it was my friend who opened my eyes to that possibility. And then I realized that I could found it myself. But to be very transparent, that's another challenge, that at this time, looking for ways to interest someone in a journey that's already a couple years down the line. I think it's probably one of the biggest challenges, I would say, of creating a startup would be finding the initial 1, 2, 3 people who will join you and dedicate themselves to building it, knowing that the risk is so high, knowing that regular paychecks do not have a long-term, there's nothing exists beyond 1 or 2 years for any startup. Even OpenAI, who is like the godfather of all these AI technologies, who's 10, 12 years old, they're not profitable. They're spending a lot of money, and who knows if they'll be here tomorrow. So it's very exciting, but it's definitely something to be aware of. And when I meet people who want to embark on this journey, I like to warn them that it could be the most rewarding experience of your life. Probably won't be financially.
Yeah.
Especially not if it's the first time. That that would be my suggestion to entrepreneurs starting out in this field.
Absolutely. I've got 2 more quick questions left for you, if that's okay, Yohann. So the first one is, tell us a little bit more about the future for you. So what is still here for you to achieve? What's the dream for you in terms of what you want to, I guess, leave behind? Because obviously it comes back to this connecting with your why and who you are, etc. Just tell us a bit about that.
Yeah. I feel very privileged to be in a place that I can focus on meaning and purpose. And my work has always been, I think it's very cliche, and Silicon Valley makes lots of fun of it, but this change the world type of thing. I really think we're in a place where there's a fundamental technological disruption that is currently happening, and accompanying people and companies to make the best of that in a way that doesn't replace their existing DNA and their achievements, but actually magnifies them, honors them, and just helps them grow and bloom and blossom even more, is where I find myself. And I come from a family of very traditional businesses. Optics, we make glasses, hearing aids, very hard real world businesses with service and quality and in person. And so this dematerialization, this digitalization, and this wave of intelligence as a service, I think it's important that it accompanies humans and that we don't leave behind a part of the population. I mean, we are all deserving to go into this new age together. And it's, for me, very important and impactful to be working on on this challenge of this transition. That's what I care about. And I want my legacy to be about that in some sense, that I helped humans who had never been tech savvy to tame the robots and work together and be successful and enjoy their working lives, and kind of help others also find more purpose in their work by kind of eliminating these busy work tasks, which at every stage of automation, we've eliminated many tasks like this. Like the tractor eliminated the many repetitive tasks, and there used to be 95% of the population working on food production, and now it's 1%. I think accompanying this transition, innovation in a way that's human, that's respectful of our values, and just keep celebrating what it means to be human. And what it means to be human, I think, is less about checking 200 emails a day and more about being face to face with clients, also just having more free time. I believe in the value of free time, and I think we deserve more of it. But that requires that during our working hours, we have the tools and methods to be more purposeful and more focused on what creates value for ourselves, for others, and for everybody involved.
I love that. And that journey you're describing, I feel passionate about. I'm also involved in some AI businesses that are enabling people to really connect with other people through relationships. So if we take on forward what you're talking about, the only collateral that will matter in any organization in the future is the power of relationship. How are humans being in relationship? And that makes the difference, not how much money they've got, not how much capital they've got in the business. It's about that relationship. So I know that you're going to be helping that. So I've got one last question, and it's just a quick one for you before I let you go, Yohann. It goes back to where we started. So I want to imagine that you can get into a time machine, which might not be too far off for us. You never know. Looking at all the things that are going on in quantum at the moment. And you can go back to yourself when you were at that table with your three brothers and feeling the way you were feeling at that point around the dinner table. And I just want you to imagine for me what you might say back to yourself as a child, knowing that where you've got to right now and knowing the journey, but knowing how you feel about yourself right now. What words of advice would you give to that younger version of yourself?
I think I would say something along the lines of, don't feel guilty for having fun and finding yourself. It's all a part of the process. Trust the process. You've got a shining future ahead of you. Stay close to your family and try to learn a thing or two from them. Don't suspect that you know nothing or that you know everything. It's always going to be somewhere in the middle, closer to ignorance. And the faster you see that, the faster you can start learning, having fun, not taking things too seriously, and making real progress.
I love that. If only every child, no matter where they're born in the world, already knew that they were already enough, and whatever it is that they bring to the world is obviously resourceful and was meant to be. So on that note, I think we shall finish. And Yohann, I really appreciate you coming on the show today.
Thank you so much, Andrew. It's been a real pleasure. I love what you do here, and I hope that your audience will enjoy this.
Thank you. Okay. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Confessions of a Successful Leader. You can access all previous episodes of the show at confessionsofaSuccessfulLeader.com. If you are interested in finding out more about conscious leadership and self-coaching, just type in Andrew Tallents into LinkedIn or your favorite browser, and you'll find my contact details and all the content that you need. Until next time, don't forget to stay present, curious, and above all, conscious.